The cabin lights were dim, the soft hum of the airplane filling the silence as most passengers settled into their seats. In seat 8A, a single dad sat slumped against the window, eyes closed, exhaustion written across his face. His young daughter slept with her head on his shoulder, her small hand gripping his jacket like she was afraid to let go. To everyone else, he looked like just another tired parent trying to get through a long flight. Then, without warning, the calm was broken. The captain's voice came over the intercom, steady but urgent, asking a question no one expected to hear at 35,000 feet. If there are any combat pilots on board, please identify yourselves. A ripple of confusion moved through the cabin. Passengers exchanged nervous looks. Something was wrong. The single dad in seat 8A stirred. His eyes opened slowly, sharp and alert, in a way that didn't match his worn clothes or quiet presence. Memories he thought he had left behind rushed back in an instant. This flight, this moment, was about to change everything. As the plane continued forward through the clouds, no one yet realized why the captain had asked that question, or why all eyes would soon turn toward the man in seat 8A. The man in seat 8A didn't move right away. He glanced down at his daughter, making sure she was still asleep, then looked around the cabin like he was seeing it for the first time. A few rows back, someone whispered nervously. Up ahead, a flight attendant hurried past, her smile tight and forced. Whatever was happening in the cockpit wasn't routine. He hadn't planned on flying today. Money was tight, and this trip was supposed to be a fresh start. After years of doing whatever work he could find, being just dad was the only title that mattered to him now. The past he carried was heavy, filled with memories he rarely spoke about and skills he hoped he'd never need again. Another announcement crackled through the speakers, asking for calm while the crew handled a technical situation. The word situation hung in the air, vague but unsettling. The single dad felt a familiar tension in his chest, the kind that came before things went wrong. He noticed the way the plane subtly shifted, the way the engine sounded just a little different. Across the aisle, a passenger stared at him, as if sensing something unusual. The man lowered his eyes, willing himself to stay invisible. But deep down, he knew that staying quiet might not be an option for long. Somewhere behind the cockpit door, a decision was being made, and it might soon pull him back into a life he'd sworn was over. The flight attendants moved with more purpose now, whispering to each other near the galley. One of them glanced back toward seat 8A, more than once, as if she had noticed the change in the man's posture. He sat straighter, his jaw set, listening closely to every sound the aircraft made. Years ago, he had learned how to read small signs, the kind most people ignored. Those instincts, buried under sleepless nights and responsibility, were awake again. In the cockpit, the captain studied the instruments, knowing the issue wasn't dangerous yet, but it could become serious if handled wrong. Air traffic control had given instructions, but time was tight. That was why the call had gone out. A backup, someone with experience under pressure. Back in the cabin, tension spread quietly. A businessman tapped his phone, even though there was no signal. A nervous couple held hands. The little girl in seat 8A shifted and murmured in her sleep, and the man's focus snapped back to her. Whatever was happening, he didn't want her to feel afraid. A flight attendant finally stopped beside his row, her voice low and careful. "Sir, may I ask what you do for a living?" Her eyes searched his face. He hesitated. Admitting the truth meant stepping forward. Staying silent meant risking everyone on board. The engines hummed on, steady but strained. As the seconds slipped away, and the choice grew heavier with every breath, the man in seat 8A looked at the flight attendant, then at his daughter, still unaware of the tension tightening around them. His silence stretched just long enough to feel uncomfortable. Around them, the cabin seemed to grow quieter, as if everyone sensed something important was about to happen. The attendant waited, her expression calm but urgent, already knowing this wasn't a casual question. Before he could answer, the plane gave a slight shudder. It wasn't violent, but it was enough to draw a few gasps. A warning light blinked briefly near the ceiling, and the low murmur of the engines changed again, subtle but wrong. The captain's voice returned, asking for patience, but this time the strain was harder to hide. The single dad finally spoke, his voice low. "I used to fly." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the full truth either. The flight attendant's eyes widened just a little. She nodded and stepped away, quickly moving toward the cockpit. As she left, a nearby passenger leaned closer, curiosity mixing with fear. The man felt the weight of every stare, every unspoken question. His heart pounded, not with panic, but with responsibility. He knew that if the captain called again, there would be no turning back. The plane continued cutting through the clouds, each minute feeling longer than the last. Somewhere ahead, alarms were being checked, options weighed, and in seat 8A, a single dad braced himself, knowing the next announcement could change everything for everyone on board. The announcement everyone was waiting for didn't come. Instead, the plane dipped again, sharper this time, enough to send a ripple of fear through the cabin. Overhead bins rattled, and a child began to cry a few rows back. The single dad tightened his grip on the armrest, keeping his face calm even as his pulse raced. This was no longer a small issue. A moment later, the same flight attendant returned, this time with the purser beside her. Their expressions were serious, stripped of the practiced airline smiles. "Sir," the purser said quietly, "the captain would like to speak with you. Now." The words landed heavy. Final. As he stood, the man felt every eye on him. His daughter stirred, confused, and he knelt to whisper that everything was okay, that he'd be right back. Leaving her seat felt harder than anything else he'd done in years. The aisle suddenly felt too narrow, the walk toward the cockpit longer than it should have been. Behind the closed cockpit door, raised voices could be heard, tense and fast. The captain turned as he entered, relief and doubt crossing his face at the same time. "We've got a situation," he said, lowering his voice, "and there's something else." Before he could explain, a warning alarm sounded, sharper and more urgent than before. The plane shuddered once more, lights flickering briefly. In that instant, the single dad realized this wasn't just about skill or experience anymore. There was a deeper problem unfolding, one that could push everyone on board to the edge. And he was already standing in the middle of it. The alarm cut off as suddenly as it had started, leaving a heavy silence in the cockpit. The captain spoke fast, explaining the failure and the shrinking window to act. The single dad listened, asking calm, precise questions, his voice steady despite the chaos. When the captain finally stepped aside, it was clear there was no other option. The responsibilities settled in, familiar and unwelcome, but necessary. Working with the crew, he guided the plane through the worst of it. Every movement measured, every second stretched thin. The cabin felt the change before they understood it. The shaking eased. The engines found a steadier rhythm. Passengers held their breath as the aircraft leveled out, relief spreading slowly, quietly, like warmth returning to cold hands. Applause broke out before the wheels ever touched down. Tears flowed. Strangers hugged. The crisis that had haunted the flight was finally under control. When the plane landed safely, the tension released all at once, leaving behind exhaustion and gratitude. As he stepped back into the cabin, his daughter ran into his arms, and for the first time, he allowed himself to breathe. That should have been the end, but as emergency crews waited outside, a uniformed official approached him, lowering his voice. "We didn't call for just any combat pilot," he said. "We were looking for you." In that moment, the single dad realized the flight wasn't a coincidence at all. His past hadn't just found him again, it had been waiting. The official didn't push for answers on the runway. Instead, he thanked the single dad quietly and told him the details could wait. What mattered was that everyone was safe. As passengers stepped off the plane, many paused to look at the man from seat 8A, offering nods, smiles, and soft words of gratitude. He accepted them with a humble shrug, still more comfortable being a father than a hero. Later, in the terminal, the truth came out in simple terms. The airline had known about his past as a combat pilot long before he boarded the flight. His name had been flagged in a system meant for rare emergencies, not secrets or plots. Fate, not planning, had placed him there when the aircraft needed him most. Hearing that, the weight on his chest finally lifted. He knelt beside his daughter, explaining only that sometimes people have skills they don't talk about, but they use them when it matters. She smiled, proud without fully understanding. That was enough. As they walked toward their next gate, the noise of the airport faded into normal life again. The flight was over, but the lesson stayed. Courage doesn't always wear a uniform, and the quiet people we overlook often carry the strength that saves the day.